I knew something was wrong when the lodge manager handed me a crisp, folded envelope. There was no sender's name, just a note inside with 3 words written in an aggressive, sharp script: check your email. I hadn't looked at my phone in 4 days. It wasn't an oversight, it was a necessity. It was the first time I had truly disconnected. No project alerts, no urgent team messages, no Mr. Harrison asking for a quick look at the structural simulations at midnight. My mother's ashes were now part of the Blue Ridge Mountains, scattered over the vistas she loved, just as she had requested in her delicate, handwritten will. I was grieving, certainly, but more than that, for the first time in years, I was still. So, you can imagine the feeling when I finally turned my phone back on. The screen exploded with a storm of red notification dots. Missed calls from human resources, a flood of emails from Mr. Harrison, and message threads marked with words like critical and immediate attention. My stomach twisted. Then I saw the email. The subject line was cold and clinical. Termination of employment, effective immediately. The man had fired me by email while I was on pre-approved bereavement leave. Not a phone call, not even a scheduled meeting. Just a sterile, typed dismissal and a legally polished kick to the gut. I was sitting on a rustic balcony overlooking a serene valley, holding a cup of herbal tea. In the space of a few seconds, my entire 10-year career felt like it had dissolved into the mountain mist. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds like another sad story about being fired on vacation. But it isn't. This is the story of how I watched a group of overconfident executives tie themselves in knots with their own hubris. But before we get to that, could I ask for a small kindness? Many people enjoy these stories, but they forget to click that subscribe button. If you're one of the many who listen without subscribing, please consider helping me reach my first goal of 10,000 subscribers. I promise the journey is worth it. So, where were we? Ah, yes, Mr. Harrison. The man who, at a company-wide meeting, once declared that people are our greatest asset. Apparently, that sentiment didn't apply if your mother had just passed away and you were trying to honor her memory. His last request to me had been, "Ella, could you just log into the Estonian Mirror server and run a diagnostic? It should only take a few minutes." I had said no, politely, respectfully, and with a carefully worded message explaining my absence. Dear Mr. Harrison, I am currently out of the office on bereavement leave to honor my mother's passing. I will be back online next Monday. I suppose my polite boundary wasn't well received because a day and a half later, I was an ex-employee. By the time I checked, my access had been revoked. My internal account was deactivated. My work email was locked, and my final paycheck was listed as pending HR review. But here is the part that Mr. Harrison and the junior designers he surrounded himself with like fashionable accessories didn't understand. I was the architect of their entire off-site project archive. It was a completely redundant, decentralized lattice of encrypted data vaults spread across a repurposed bunker in rural Montana, a geothermal-powered facility in Iceland, and that small server co-op in Estonia. It was efficient, secure, and decentralized, exactly as Mr. Harrison had demanded. He didn't want to pay for centralized credential management or a shared admin pool, claiming it was too expensive. His solution was to give one lead systems architect root access and call it a day. And that lead systems architect was me. I didn't reply to the termination email, not right away. I needed a moment. I sat there on the balcony, watching the sun cast long shadows across the valley, and I made a mental list. I would need to export all my communication logs, screenshot the audit trails, back up the redundancy maps, and create a timeline of my work on the off-site archive. I needed to find the specific email where Mr. Harrison had explicitly rejected my proposal for a dual authentication protocol. By the time I finished my tea, I had a plan. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about documentation. But in the quiet stillness of my grief, a different feeling began to settle in my chest. A kind of calm I hadn't felt in a decade. Mr. Harrison had pulled the plug, but he had done it completely blind, with no idea the cord was wrapped squarely around his own neck, and I, for the first time in my life, was finally free. The official email was a masterpiece of corporate jargon, speaking of restructuring the organization for optimized agility and dissolving non-essential roles to increase stakeholder value. It ended with a cheerful, "We wish you the best in your future endeavors," with a copy sent to HR. I stared at my phone screen, the words blurring behind my sunglasses as a gentle breeze rustled the trees. The feeling was a strange, muted kind of anger. It was almost clinical, like reading about a fire at your own house in a local newspaper. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my phone. I just set it down carefully, took a long, slow breath of the clean mountain air, and let the silence seep into my bones. Mr. Harrison hadn't called. He hadn't bothered with a proper offboarding. He had treated my 10 years of service like a free trial for a streaming service he forgot to cancel. As I sat there, I thought to myself, "All right, you want a clean break, Mr. Harrison? Let's talk about precision." The first thing I did was a mental inventory, not of my feelings, but of the protocols. Who else had the master keys to the archives? No one. That was the whole point of his cost-saving measure. Were there backup access logs he could use? No, he had cut those from the budget. Could they brute force their way in? Not without tripping 3 separate fail-safes and a remote lockdown switch I had personally designed after he said, "Let's reduce spending on third-party security." I had built those archive servers from the ground up. I had personally flown to Montana to oversee the hardware installation because he didn't want to pay qualified local contractors. The Iceland connection was configured through a VPN relay with firewall rules stricter than his own ethics, and the Estonian server was a favor from an old university colleague who owed me one. All 3 nodes were encrypted, all 3 synced nightly, and all 3 were authenticated by keys stored on a single encrypted token in my personal possession, which was currently tucked away in my luggage. I had tried to give him redundancy. I had pitched shared key backups. I had proposed formal offboarding templates and system handover protocols, and every single time, the answer was the same. "It's too expensive," or "You're overcomplicating things, Ella. We need to be agile." No one seemed to remember that agility without a foundation is just chaos. I didn't reply to their emails that day. I let the silence stretch, letting their anxiety build. Mr. Harrison thought my silence was a sign of defeat. What it really meant was that I was observing. I ordered dinner, left a generous tip, and leaned back, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. My grief was still there, a heavy weight in my heart, but something else was stirring beside it. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity, cold, clean, and patient. Let them fumble with the locks. Let the system do what it was designed to do. Let Mr. Harrison email the entire world. I wouldn't lift a finger. Not until they finally understood which finger they were missing. The following Monday, the day I was supposed to be back at work, I woke up to the sound of birdsong and a strong desire to bring about a minor corporate meltdown. Instead, I opened my laptop and did something completely unexpected. I was professional. I drafted an email with the subject line, "Formal offboarding support, credentials and infrastructure transition plan." The body of the email was clear, courteous, and meticulously detailed. I outlined everything they would need to smoothly take over my infrastructure work: server maps, protocol notes, credential architecture, and 2-factor configuration warnings. I even offered a free 30-minute handover call via video conference. I didn't do it for Mr. Harrison. I did it for the legal timestamp. The reply I received was complete and utter silence. Not from HR, not from legal, not even an angry emoji from Mr. Harrison. It was as if my email had been launched directly into a black hole. Back at headquarters, I could only imagine the scene. The design department, led by Leo, a recent graduate who still thought CAD was a type of fish. He was the son of a potential client, so, naturally, he was considered management material. I pictured Leo trying to log into the off-site archives. First Montana, which would time out. Then Iceland, which would refuse the connection. Then Estonia, which would trigger a lockout warning. The servers were performing exactly as they were designed to when an unverified request came from an unknown source. And Leo, in all his misplaced confidence, probably told Mr. Harrison it was just a minor network issue and started rebooting the office router. And Mr. Harrison believed him. Not because it made any logical sense, but because the alternative was admitting that I was essential. Admitting that, just maybe, firing the only person with root access to their entire portfolio of project data wasn't a brilliant power move, but an act of corporate self-sabotage. That very afternoon, Mr. Harrison announced in a company-wide message that the transition from my legacy infrastructure was proceeding smoothly, and that Leo would be spearheading optimization efforts. Someone replied with a party emoji. I simply copied my exit logs into a private, encrypted archive and uploaded it to my lawyer's secure cloud storage with the subject line, in case of falsehoods. Because I knew they would lie. It was no longer just disbelief I felt. It was a slow, burning insult that hummed just beneath my skin. I had warned them. I had handed them a map. They had chosen to tear it up and use it for confetti. And the most frustrating part? They didn't even realize their ship was sinking. I pictured Mr. Harrison and Leo standing in the server room, staring at a blank screen, muttering something about firewalls as if it were a magic spell. Meanwhile, my machines were sleeping peacefully, untouchable, and obedient only to the mistress they had just discarded with an HR memo. I didn't reply to their silence. I just watched, like a biologist observing a mold culture grow in a petri dish that was clearly labeled "Do Not Ignore." The countdown had already begun. The meltdown started quietly, late on a Wednesday night. The system logs told the story. A sync error on the primary node, a write failure, then a local data corruption alert. The backup attempt failed, followed by a long, panicked silence from their end. The kind of silence you get right before a dam breaks. I found out the next morning while sipping coffee and watching the sunrise. My professional network scanner, which I kept running out of habit, lit up like a holiday display. Pings from the corporate office to the mirror servers had been increasing exponentially overnight. A frantic storm of failed attempts from multiple IP addresses, all unauthorized. I didn't interfere. I just observed. They tried Montana first, probably because it had the most user-friendly interface. But without the access key stored on my physical device, the system locked them out after 3 tries. Then came Iceland, which triggered a passive defense protocol. Estonia didn't even respond. It was configured to go completely dark at the first sign of a brute force attack. Then, Mr. Harrison's email arrived. It was one sentence, with no greeting. Can you send the credentials for the offsite archives? This is time-sensitive. Time-sensitive. As if my mother's funeral wasn't. As if my first vacation in 5 years was negotiable. But this was urgent. I didn't reply. I had already offered them the keys when I was still being treated with a shred of dignity. They had missed their chance for a graceful transition. Now, we were in the land of consequences. Back at the firm, a major audit for a government smart city contract had begun. Quarterly compliance checks, due diligence documents, investor statements, all of it was tied to a data pipeline that was now feeding them corrupted nonsense. The local servers, which had been built cheaply and in a rush after my departure, were not just unstable. They were completely fried. One directory had overwritten itself in a loop until it was just gigabytes of useless code, and the only clean copies of that data were in the archives. The Investor Relations Department started sending nervous inquiries. Can we get confirmation of document integrity for the Q2 submission? Can we verify the retention timelines for the audit? Mr. Harrison, for all his bravado, had no answers. He just had Leo running around checking network cables. Finally, someone on the board asked the question Mr. Harrison had been avoiding. Did we ever confirm credential continuity during Ella's departure? I imagine him blinking as if he'd just been slapped. Then, another email landed in my inbox. This one was from the Chief Technology Officer. Hey, Ella. Not sure if you saw Harrison's note. We're in a bit of a bind. Just looking for the off-site login chain. No drama. Appreciate it. No drama. That's what they were calling it now. Firing me mid-leave, ignoring my handover offer, pretending I hadn't built the very foundation they were standing on. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have written something scathing, but I didn't. I simply archived the email, added it to my legal folder, and went to get more coffee. Let them sweat. I had offered them a map out of the woods. Now they were lost deep in the trees, and the wolves were starting to howl. The first real sign of their panic came in the form of a typo. Someone forwarded me an internal message from Mr. Harrison to the legal department, which he had accidentally sent to an old, outdated distribution list. The subject was, Ella's sabotage? As if he were just pondering the idea. The email was a classic blend of half-truths and bold accusations. We can't access the off-site archives, and she was the only one with control. I'm not saying it was deliberate, but if it looks like sabotage, I had walked right out of their infrastructure and straight into legal protection. After that, my inbox was flooded. An email from the interim CIO. Ella, please confirm whether you've made any unauthorized changes to the off-site systems. Legal has been advised. One from HR, hilariously out of sync. We'd like to schedule a quick chat to ensure you've returned all company property. And one that was forwarded from an old vendor representative who thought I should know what was being said. It was a message chain between Mr. Harrison, the CTO, and their insurance liability team. If she's not cooperating, we may need to involve law enforcement. That was the moment my stomach dropped, then locked into place like solid steel. I was no longer amused by their incompetence. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of someone who owed me a favor. Her name was Miss Chen, a civil litigator with a spine of iron and the calm voice of a kindergarten teacher who regularly sued Fortune 500 companies for fun. She didn't even let me finish explaining. Forward me everything, she said calmly, and do not reply to anyone. So I didn't. I documented every email, every message, every failed login attempt from their corporate IP addresses. I screen-recorded terminal logs, cataloged timestamps, and cross-referenced their own error reports with my backup verification snapshots. I created a digital paper trail so airtight it was beyond reproach. Then, I encrypted the entire package and uploaded it to 2 separate secure cloud servers, one labeled Plausible Deniability and the other Harrison's Hubris. Let's be perfectly clear. I had not sabotaged anything. I hadn't altered a single key, deleted a single file, or triggered any manual failsafe. The system was running exactly as I had designed it, intentionally complex, aggressively secure, and completely dependent on the one person Mr. Harrison had treated as disposable. Meanwhile, he was trying to spin the narrative. He started planting whispers in internal calls, suggesting I was stressed, or overwhelmed, or that I hadn't taken the restructuring well. Someone in the legal department asked if I had a documented history of mental health issues. That email was immediately forwarded to Ms. Chen, who flagged it as a serious violation. And still, I said nothing. My silence was louder than any denial. I didn't need to scream. I needed them to continue unraveling the mess they had created. He thought he was tightening a noose, not realizing he was pulling it around his own neck. The dam finally cracked on a Thursday. A senior investor, someone with enough shares to make Mr. Harrison break into a cold sweat, sent an ultimatum to the board. I want a live demonstration of full backup recoverability. No slideshows, no simulations. Live. Today. The CTO tried to stall, coughing up corporate excuses about infrastructure optimization and deep malware scans. It was the professional equivalent of saying your dog ate your homework while the dog is chewing on the Wi-Fi router in front of everyone. Word spread through the company like wildfire. People weren't just whispering anymore. They were forwarding chat logs and emails. Then, an operations executive sent me a screenshot. It was a message from Mr. Harrison, dated 3 weeks before my firing. We don't need that level of redundancy. Ella over-engineers everything. Let's just simplify and move fast. She's paranoid about backup structures. That message aged like milk left in a hot car. The board saw it. The legal team saw it. The compliance consultant they had quietly brought in to assess the damage saw it. The consultant took one look at the system failure and muttered, "Who on earth signed off on this?" Mr. Harrison had, with his whole chest. Emergency meetings started popping up on the company calendar with titles like Urgent, Infra Failures and Action Plan, Non-Cooperation. I was still silent, watching the drama unfold. But the feeling of vindication hadn't turned into victory yet. They hadn't hit rock bottom, not while they still thought they could talk their way out of the crisis. Not while Mr. Harrison believed this could be solved with a PR campaign and a carefully worded social media post about learning from adversity. I knew better. I knew that beneath the surface of their broken backups and server failures, something much darker was hidden. Something they didn't think anyone would ever find. Because no one was supposed to have the kind of access required to find it. Except, of course, me. So I waited. They had started a fire, and I was holding all the oxygen. Mr. Harrison's desperation finally took the form of an email with the subject line, "Let's work together, open to discussion." When his usual charm failed, he would coat his words in vague professionalism and hope no one noticed the scent of fear. The email read like a greeting card from a manipulator. "Ella, while we may have had communication breakdowns, I want to extend an olive branch. I would like to offer you a consulting fee to help us reorient the off-site systems and ensure audit compliance. No hard feelings?" The translation was clear. Help us clean up the mess our incompetence created, and we'll pay you a small fee to pretend we're still in charge. There was one line that made me laugh out loud. Think of this as an opportunity to heal and collaborate. Heal? They had tried to ruin my reputation, floated the idea of criminal charges, and now I was supposed to show up like a magical IT fairy and fix the kingdom they had burned to the ground? No. But this time, I didn't ignore it. I took my time and crafted a response, not to Mr. Harrison, but to the world. I posted a simple, measured reflection on my professional networking profile. "Boundaries matter," I wrote, especially in industries where the lines between work and life are blurred and loyalty is often exploited. I was fired during a family bereavement for refusing to work while scattering my mother's ashes. I said nothing when I was accused of sabotage for a system I built and had offered to hand over properly. Today, I was offered a consulting fee to help clean up the mess I was blamed for creating. I respectfully declined. Respect isn't retroactive. I concluded with a message to my peers. To those building the next generation of infrastructure, document everything, protect yourselves, and never mistake silence for weakness. I used no names and made no direct accusations. I just stated the truth. The post went viral within hours. It was shared throughout the architectural and tech communities. Colleagues from my past, even those who had once called me too intense, responded with supportive comments. Mr. Harrison's online profile suddenly went quiet. Behind the scenes, Ms. Chen was preparing for battle. She had compiled a harassment log from all the emails I had received, the thinly veiled threats, and the post-termination demands. She called it Exhibit A, the gaslighting parade. Then came the defamation preparations, with every whispered accusation and false claim logged, watermarked, and cross-referenced with timestamps. "You have enough here to bury a mid-size firm," she told me, not even looking up from her notes. "We're not asking for a settlement. We're telling them the terms." And yet, I still didn't give her the green light, because I knew one more domino was about to fall. And when it did, the entire structure would collapse under its own weight. The mess wasn't just technical, it was criminal, and they had no idea that I had the proof. The final message came from an old acquaintance in investor relations. "Just a heads up," he wrote. "2 institutional investors pulled their money this morning. The SEC has started an internal inquiry. Keep your head down." He didn't need to say more. I knew what it meant, and more importantly, I knew why. It was no longer just about the failed audit or the inaccessible backups. It was about what was inside those backups. Things that even Mr. Harrison probably didn't fully understand. That's the problem with arrogance. It makes you sloppy with your secrets. Those off-site archives weren't just for storing project blueprints and compliance paperwork. They also held encrypted snapshots of internal reviews, automatically archiving everything from invoice chains to expense reports. It was a feature I had built years ago after watching Mr. Harrison manually adjust a vendor ledger to fit a quarterly narrative. I had never planned to use it, but it was there, quietly waiting. A year prior, the firm had released its Q2 results, and something in the numbers hadn't added up. I remembered thinking it was strange, but I had given them the benefit of the doubt. Now, I dug into the old logs, decrypted one of the archives, and compared the internal records with the public-facing books. The pattern was undeniable. Quarter after quarter, there were duplicate invoices, phantom clients, and deferred liabilities buried under projected earnings. It was surgical fraud, dressed up in spreadsheets. I should have been shocked, but what I felt was colder than that. It was pure, distilled clarity. Mr. Harrison hadn't fired me because of his ego. He had fired me to remove a variable he couldn't control. The off-site archives were never just backups. They were a mirror, and he knew exactly what they would reflect. That night, I took one of the encrypted drives from my private archive, placed it in a padded case, drove to Ms. Chen's office, and slid it across her desk. She didn't ask what was on it. She just looked at the label, whistled softly, and said, "Do I want to open this before or after I forward it to the SEC?" I just shrugged. Flip a coin. We both knew this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Or perhaps something more fundamental. Correction. The kind of systemic karma that gives corporate lawyers nightmares. Mr. Harrison had hollowed out the company to make his quarterly numbers look good. Now those numbers were about to bring everything crashing down. And me? I felt no rage, no glee, just a sharp, focused stillness. The truth was no longer mine to carry. It now belonged to the federal government. The hearing room was cold, not in temperature, but in its energy. The SEC officials were efficient and direct. They flipped through binders and clicked through the reams of logs I had provided. The encrypted packets, the internal discrepancies, the chat transcripts, the access warnings. Every breadcrumb Mr. Harrison thought he had swept under the rug, I had labeled, watermarked, and gift-wrapped with forensic precision. When they asked me to speak, I told them the facts, simply and clearly. My voice was steady. I had offered to hand over the infrastructure, and they had declined. I had warned them about the lack of redundancy, and they had ignored me. The off-site archives had operated exactly as they were designed. What they found inside them was a result of their own actions. One of the regulators looked up at me and said, "You built a better compliance system than half the companies we regulate." I didn't smile. I just said, I was trying to protect the company from itself. The final report was released 2 weeks later. Mr. Harrison was terminated with cause. The CTO resigned, pending investigation. The head of finance took an early retirement. The board issued a weak public apology, full of phrases like regrettable oversights and lessons learned. Their stock plummeted. As for me, I was cleared of all accusations, officially and quietly. Ms. Chen called me that Friday. "You're bulletproof," she said. Also, someone from Viridian Structures called. You know, the firm Mr. Harrison used to mock in meetings. The one whose tech stack you always admired. They offered me a full-time role, Director of Systems Architecture. Double my old salary, fully remote, and with a company culture built on integrity. When I walked into their downtown office for my orientation, I passed a glass-walled conference room. On the wall, framed in simple black, was a quote. "Respect is cheaper than recovery." I stopped and stared at it. 10 words that would have saved Mr. Harrison a company. I stepped into my new office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. There were no urgent pings, no guilt-laced emails, no desperation disguised as outreach. Just silence. And for the first time in years, it wasn't empty. It was earned. The story of Ella teaches us a powerful lesson about professional integrity and the quiet strength of competence. In a world that often rewards loud confidence over quiet capability, her journey is a reminder that true value cannot be silenced or dismissed. The core message is this: your self-worth is not determined by those who fail to see your value. The most important takeaway is the power of documentation and maintaining professional boundaries. Ella's meticulous record-keeping wasn't an act of revenge, but of self-preservation. It became her shield and her sword. This story encourages everyone, in any field, to respect their own time, their own expertise, and their own well-being. When you are dismissed, disrespected, or undervalued, do not let it diminish you. Instead, let it be the catalyst for finding a place where your contributions are not just welcomed, but celebrated. True success isn't about proving your old detractors wrong. It's about building a future so bright that you no longer look back. Your skills, your ethics, and your resilience are your greatest assets. Invest in them, protect them, and know that the right opportunity, in the right environment, is always waiting for you.